Hi there, this is Sean Skellinger. What is seller financing in real estate? To learn about seller financing, let's talk about traditional financing first. In traditional financing, there are three parties to a real estate transaction: the bank, the buyer, and the seller. Before closing, the bank pre-qualifies and underwrites the buyer. Closings are generally held at a title company, and that's where the buyer transfers the funds to the seller. And in return for the funds, the buyer and the bank sign a promissory note and mortgage deed. The note is an outline of the payments, and the deed is a lien on the home for those payments. After closing, the home is transferred to the buyer, and the buyer makes all future payments to the bank. Now, in summary, before closing, the buyer is pre-qualified and underwritten by the bank. The closings are held at title companies. The buyer pays the seller at closing, and the buyer and the bank sign a promissory note and deed. After closing, the home is transferred to the buyer, and all payments go to the bank. Now, for seller financing, the biggest difference is that there's no bank. In fact, the seller becomes the bank. In doing so, the seller assumes the responsibilities of the bank and also receives the rewards of being the bank. Before closing, the seller pre-qualifies and underwrites the buyer through a background check, verifying credit, employment, funds, taxes, etc. Seller financing closings are also held at title companies, and this is where the buyer transfers the funds to the seller, generally just the down payment, and the buyer and the seller agree to a promissory note and mortgage deed, outlining the payments and securing the real estate as a lien to those payments. After closing, the home is transferred to the buyer, and all future mortgage payments go to the seller. Now let's compare the seller financing steps to the traditional financing steps. Before closing, the seller does pre-qualify and underwrite the buyer. The closings are held at a title company where the buyer pays the seller. The buyer and the bank sign a promissory note and deed of trust. The bank does not sign because there is no bank. The buyer and the seller sign these two documents. After closing, the home is transferred to the buyer. All future mortgage payments do not go to the bank, they go to the seller. As you can see, seller financing and traditional financing follow the same steps. So again, what is seller financing? Seller financing is a flexible financing option that allows the seller to become the bank. The best part is that seller financing offers more benefits than traditional financing for both the buyer and seller. Learn how seller financing can benefit you below.